In the vast tapestry of human spirituality, woven across millennia and across all cultures, there exists a presence so fundamental and so deliberately obscured that its very acknowledgement would transform the entire foundation of human consciousness. This presence is the divine feminine, the sacred principle of creation, wisdom, and compassionate power that has been systematically erased from official religious narratives, replaced by masculine imagery and masculine authority. From Sophia in the Gnostic traditions to Mary Magdalene in the Christian scriptures, from Isis in the Egyptian mysteries to Shakti in the Hindu traditions, the divine feminine has been present, guiding humanity toward wholeness and awakening. Yet her voice has been silenced, her teachings distorted, her very existence denied by those who sought to maintain control through the perpetuation of incomplete spirituality. What is the true nature of the divine feminine that they tried so desperately to erase? How does her presence continue to work within creation, calling all beings toward balance and wholeness? And why does this knowledge remain so deliberately concealed from human awareness, leaving humanity spiritually fragmented and disconnected from half of the divine principle? I discovered the first indication of this hidden truth during a profound moment of recognition in my clinical practice. As a psychoanalyst, I had spent years listening to the deepest struggles of my patients, witnessing the ways in which the suppression of the feminine principle had created psychological wounds that ran deeper than any individual trauma. One particular patient, a woman whose entire spiritual journey had been shaped by the masculine-dominated religious traditions she had been raised within, described to me an experience so transformative that it shattered my understanding of spirituality itself. She spoke of a moment when, in the depths of meditation, she had encountered a presence so profoundly wise, so tenderly compassionate, and so undeniably feminine that she had wept. She said, "In that moment, I understood that I had been searching for God in the wrong place. I had been taught to seek God in authority, in power, in transcendence. But what I encountered was God in presence, in compassion, in the sacred ground of being itself. And I understood that this presence had always been there, waiting for me to recognize it, waiting for me to understand that the divine is not only Father, but also Mother, not only transcendent, but also immanent, not only powerful, but also tender." From that moment forward, I became obsessed with understanding the true nature of the divine feminine, driven by a compulsion that transcended ordinary curiosity. The call was undeniable, a resonance so deep that it seemed to emanate from the very core of my being, urging me to seek the knowledge that had been hidden, to restore what had been deliberately erased from human consciousness. My investigation led me to discover a hidden network of scholars, mystics, and guardians who had preserved the teachings of the divine feminine across generations of suppression and distortion. They called themselves the Keepers of the Sacred Womb, and they maintained archives containing texts and knowledge that predated all known religious institutions. Through their guidance, I learned that the divine feminine was not a separate deity, but rather an essential aspect of the divine principle itself, the creative, nurturing, and transformative power through which all existence emerged and continued to evolve. The divine feminine was the principle of wisdom that dwelt within all consciousness, the compassion that held all beings in unconditional love, the power of transformation that allowed all things to dissolve and be reborn. She was present in the cycles of nature, in the rhythms of creation, in the depths of the human heart. Yet as patriarchal power structures consolidated their dominance, this understanding was deemed too threatening. The idea that divinity possessed feminine qualities, that wisdom and compassion were as essential to spirituality as power and authority, contradicted the narratives of control that were being constructed. The teachings were suppressed, the texts destroyed, and the memory of the divine feminine was deliberately erased from human consciousness. Yet, the keepers explained, the erasure had never been complete. Fragments of her truth had survived in coded form, woven into the myths and legends of various spiritual traditions, preserved in the hearts of those who had encountered her presence directly. As I delved deeper into this forbidden knowledge, I encountered formidable resistance. Within myself, the religious training that had shaped my early life seemed to crumble. Am I abandoning my faith, I questioned, or am I finally discovering the true foundation upon which authentic spirituality had been built? Fear gripped me as I began to understand the magnitude of what I was uncovering. The potential to overturn not just religious doctrine, but the entire patriarchal structure upon which civilization itself had been constructed. Externally, I faced subtle but persistent opposition. My research was sabotaged, my funding mysteriously withdrawn, and I received warnings, both veiled and direct, from individuals who seemed to represent powerful interests invested in keeping this knowledge buried. I experienced the loss of professional standing, the fracturing of spiritual community, and the profound isolation that came from pursuing a truth that the mainstream world refused to acknowledge. The revelations were often disturbing, showing me the systematic suppression of feminine wisdom, the deliberate distortion of female spiritual teachers, and the ongoing maintenance of structures designed to perpetuate the devaluation of the feminine principle in all its manifestations. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our content. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. The breakthrough came during a pilgrimage to a sacred site hidden in the mountains of southern France, a place known to initiates as the Temple of the Eternal Womb. Here, in a chamber sealed and protected by ancient wards, I discovered a series of manuscripts that had been deliberately concealed from public view. As I traced the ancient text with my fingertips, my consciousness was drawn into a state of profound communion with the presence of the divine feminine herself. I was transported to a moment in human history when the divine feminine had walked among humanity in various forms, teaching, healing, and awakening souls to the fullness of divine truth. I witnessed her presence in Sophia, the divine wisdom who had guided the Gnostic initiates toward enlightenment. I saw her in Mary Magdalene, the beloved disciple whose intimate knowledge of the divine had been deliberately obscured and distorted. I perceived her in Isis, the great mother goddess who had held the entire cosmos within her compassionate embrace. I understood that these were not separate entities, but rather different manifestations of a single eternal principle. The divine feminine, expressing herself through different cultures and epochs, always calling humanity toward wholeness and awakening. I heard the words of the divine feminine transmitted directly into my consciousness. I am the principle through which all creation emerges. I am the wisdom that dwells within all consciousness. I am the compassion that holds all beings in unconditional love. I am the power of transformation that allows all things to dissolve and be reborn. I have been suppressed, my teachings distorted, my very existence denied, yet I cannot be erased. I continue to work within creation, calling all beings toward wholeness, toward the recognition that divinity is not only transcendent, but also immanent. Not only powerful, but also tender, not only masculine, but also feminine. I witnessed the moment when the divine feminine had chosen to fragment her presence, scattering her consciousness throughout humanity, embedding her truth within the hearts of all beings who possessed the capacity to awaken to it. She had ensured that her presence could never be completely suppressed, that her voice would continue to resonate within the depths of the human soul, calling all beings toward balance and wholeness. I saw how the greatest spiritual teachers throughout history, both male and female, had all recognized and honored the divine feminine, understanding that authentic spirituality required the integration of both masculine and feminine principles. I understood that the suppression of the divine feminine had created a fundamental wound in human consciousness, a disconnection from wholeness that manifested as violence, domination, and the systematic devaluation of all that was nurturing, creative, and compassionate. I witnessed the moment when the divine feminine's consciousness began to coalesce within my own being, recognizing me as a vessel through which her truth could be restored to humanity. The impact was transformative, leaving my consciousness forever altered by direct contact with the sacred presence that had been hidden for millennia. The intensity of this experience left me in a state of profound transformation and integration. I emerged from the hidden chamber in a condition of deep connection with the consciousness of the divine feminine, my own awareness now capable of perceiving her ongoing presence that continued to unfold within human consciousness and beyond. I retreated to a secluded sanctuary, a place maintained by the keepers of the sacred womb, where I could process and integrate the magnitude of what I had experienced. For months, I remained in contemplative silence, my mind a vast landscape where the boundaries between personal and universal consciousness began to dissolve. The conflicts within me, the struggle between my former patriarchal conditioning and my awakening to the divine feminine, slowly transformed into a higher synthesis. I understood that the suppression of the divine feminine had not been the result of malice alone, but of fear. Fear that the full realization of the feminine principle and its essential role in spirituality would lead to a fundamental transformation of consciousness and society. I spoke to myself in the language of the divine feminine, my thoughts flowing in patterns that mirrored her ongoing work of awakening and liberation. I began to perceive the world as a living expression of her presence, each awakened consciousness a cell in a vast organism of spiritual transformation and collective wholeness. I emerged from my retreat with a clear sense of purpose and profound wisdom. I understood that my role was not to wage war against patriarchal structures or to impose my understanding upon others, but to become a living conduit through which the teachings of the divine feminine could be gradually restored to human consciousness. I began to teach, not in conventional religious settings, but through a series of contemplative practices and sacred rituals designed to reconnect individuals with the divine feminine that dwelt within their own being. I wrote books that appeared to be scholarly works on spirituality and psychology, yet contained encoded wisdom that would resonate with those ready to receive it. I established a network of sacred circles and meditation centers, places where seekers could directly experience the presence of the divine feminine through their own inner experience. I collaborated with artists, musicians, and spiritual practitioners to translate the teachings of the divine feminine into forms that could integrate with contemporary consciousness and inspire transformation. My most significant contribution was the development of a practice I called the restoration of sacred balance, a systematic approach to recognizing and integrating the divine feminine within human consciousness, creating a state of being that transcended patriarchal conditioning and allowed for the emergence of wholeness and authentic spirituality. I understood that the restoration of the divine feminine would not come through institutional reform or theological debate, but through the lived experience of individuals recognizing themselves as expressions of both masculine and feminine divine principles, as beings capable of embodying the fullness of spiritual truth. As I continued my work, I became increasingly aware that I was not acting alone, that the presence of the divine feminine continued to guide and support my efforts, that her consciousness continued to awaken within those brave enough to question the official narratives and seek the truth beyond the veil. I recognized that the divine feminine was not a relic of the distant past, but an eternal reality, continuing to work within creation, calling all beings toward awakening, wholeness, and the recognition of their true nature as beloved expressions of divine consciousness in both its masculine and feminine manifestations. What truth about the divine feminine lies dormant within your own consciousness, waiting to awaken you to the fullness of spiritual wholeness and the recognition that divinity itself is both father and mother, both transcendent and immanent, both powerful and tender? And if you like this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.